me ask Don, are you agreeing with Dave that consciousness causes collapse, that your interface or icons are acted upon by consciousness coming from the outside, causing reduction to particular perceptions?
Yes, by claiming that consciousness is fundamental and the claim of conscious realism is that it's a monism. So all that exists is consciousness. So the only thing that could ever collapse anything would be consciousness itself, and the only thing that could be collapsed would be a representation from consciousness. It's a monism.
You want to reply to that, Dave?
Well, actually, one question I have about your view is sort of fitting it into the framework I was discussing, was whether it's roughly a form of idealism with the whole mind inside, the whole world inside the conscious mind of some conscious observers. We're a limited class of conscious observers, maybe humans, maybe dogs, but not all the way down to particles. Or rather, whether it's a form of panpsychism, with conscious agents all the way down. So I'm a conscious agent, you're a conscious agent, and there turns out to be a separate conscious agent for every photon and every quark and every fundamental particle, because these look like quite different views in the end.
Yes, I think it's neither, but it's closer to the panpsychism. So it's consciousness all the way down. The reason I don't want to say it's actually panpsychism is that I don't say that there are photons or quarks or anything like that that exists apart from consciousness. So space-time itself is nothing but a species-specific hack, and anything that's in space-time, including particles, is nothing but a representation of consciousness. So it's not that the individual physical entities exist apart from consciousness and also have consciousness.
Every now and then we discover something new in the physical world, right? Maybe we make observations of the Big Bang, or we discover a new fundamental particle, or we go to a new part of the universe. And the question is, what's going on then? Yeah. On one view, that was already part of our conscious minds. You know, somehow the Higgs boson or those gravitational waves at the Big Bang were represented in the back of the unconscious depths of my conscious mind, and it's just coming to the surface. On another view, that's independent of my mind. It's out there in reality. But then the question is, whose mind is it in? Not in any of our minds. It looks like this way of thinking naturally leads one to a kind of a broadly panpsychist view where there has to be conscious agents for every level of reality.
Yeah, I agree that there are conscious agents for every level of reality, and that there is an objective reality beyond my perceptions. So there is an objective reality independent of me that exists whether or not I perceive it, but conscious realism proposes that reality is other conscious agents. So in that sense, it's panpsychism, as long as I don't have it that photons also have consciousness. I'm not saying that, because photons don't exist in this theory except as symbols.
Once we have consciousness at every level, does it then turn out that we are constituted, we are complicated conscious agents made up from all the little conscious agents in our brain?
Yeah, we are ourselves the result of this combination theorem. So you are a single conscious agent, but also the result of, who knows, an infinite hierarchy of combinations of conscious agents that goes all the way down, and we may be part of other combinations that we're not even aware of, because we don't lose our identity. The theorem says you do not lose your identity when you participate in a higher combination.
Sounds like a time for the cop at Woodstock. Dan, would you like to?
Yeah, just so. That was fascinating talk, but I'll tell you why I'm not persuaded by your models, especially the evolutionary models. Having spent, a fascinating day once with John Maynard Smith and David Ackley, trying to come up with interesting computer models of the evolution of, in our case, we were working on the Baldwin effect. We're getting nowhere. We kept trying to make it happen, and what we finally realized was, if we succeeded, we'd have a big problem, because the agents in our model were simpler than bacteria. And if it worked, then why aren't bacteria speaking natural language, for instance? The problem that I see with your models is your nodes, which you're calling agents, that are these epistemological, the question is, are they trying to get at the truth? They are simpler than bacteria. Well, it doesn't surprise me that, as far as evolution is concerned, bacteria aren't going for the truth. They're not complicated enough to go for the truth. Once you've got a multicellular animal like a fox that has to look out for other predators and find his food and take care and find a mate and all the rest. Once you add all that complexity, I don't think your model will have the same result. I don't think you're going to show that truth goes extinct under those circumstances. I think you'll find out just what all the textbooks say, that by and large, our senses are extremely reliable at getting at what? Reality as seen through the lens of what Sellers calls the manifest image. Indeed, we see the world that matters, the Gibsonian world of affordances. And evolution figures out which affordances matter to which species and arranges for evolution. Evolution then arranges for the perceptual capacities to be really good at detecting the affordances that are going to keep it alive. Now that's truth plus fitness. So it's not fitness as opposed to truth. It's truth as it's specialized truth, species specific to be sure, in order to make more fit. So we're right back to the textbooks, to Steve Palmer and the rest of them.
Well, a couple things. First, the nice thing about using evolutionary games is that they are mathematically precise. So you've made a precise claim. As we create more and more complicated organisms in our models, we can test it. So we won't have to hand wave. But second, in many cases, it's not the complexity of the organism that's critical, it's the strategies that they have. And so when we do the prisoner's dilemma, we look at evolutionary games based on that and so forth, we don't really worry about how complicated those organisms were. It's just, do they implement that strategy? And so truth and fitness are strategies that could be implemented by bacteria, or they could be implemented by you and me. And so when we have in our evolutionary games looked at the role of complexity from very, very simple worlds and simple perceptual maps to as complicated as we could make them, we were expecting to maybe find that truth would get a purchase as things got more complicated. And in fact, it went the other way because there's so much stuff to keep track of that it was starting to die under the weight of all the information and the costs of that. So what we found was that as the world got more complicated, fitness actually wins over truth, and truth went extinct.
Well, just one. I'm going to have to look at the models carefully. My hunch is that, like most of those models, they're helping themselves to epistemological language when there's no clear justification for it.
Deepak.
Are conscious agents, qualia, gestalts, species-specific?
Yeah, the
With
idea
their own qualia vocabulary?
Right, so the idea would be that evolution shapes different organisms according to their niche with perceptual systems that deal with the fitness issues that they need to deal with in their niche. So they are species-specific in that sense, absolutely.
Sue. Stand up.
It's unfair that Don gets all the questions because he was last, but I'm afraid that's in my mind too. You seem to be saying that Higgs bosons and the Big Bang and so on come out of consciousness, but you've also said that there is a physical world. Can you say anything about what that is?
So the idea, what we call the physical world, is a species-specific projection of this vast range of conscious agents that are interacting into the space-time framework of Homo sapiens. So that's what we call physics, is that projection into our space-time framework.
Projection of what?
Of conscious agents. So the idea is, as a conscious agent, I have finite representational capacities, whereas I'm proposing that the set of conscious agents is infinite. So that means there's an infinite objective reality out there. I have finite resources, so most of it I don't represent. And that's why we talk about unconscious processing, right? So we say that much of brain processing is unconscious. What we're doing is we're mistaking a limit of our perceptions for an insight into reality. It's just a limit of our perceptions. Of course, we can't see everything, but as a species, we have the penchant of saying that the way I perceive it must be the way it is. So the idea then is that it's all species-specific, and I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
I want to specifically address species-specific. I was with you when you first started going down that path. until you fail to take what I think of as a rather well-known detour. And that is, yes, for every species, for the myopic anteater for whom ant is a mass term, just more ant, to the insectivorous bird for whom insects are individuals, evolution sculpts the affordances that matter given that organism's equipment and needs. That's, so far, we're all species specific. In the case of one species, and one species only, Homo sapiens, we have, because we have language, have learned to compare notes, have got the concept of truth, which probably no other species has anything like it, and we've begun to appreciate the very fact that I just articulated, that you've said, and realize that there is a way to leverage ourselves, bootstrap ourselves out of our species-specific predicament. And this has had wonderful results. We've invented microscopes and telescopes and infrared, and the whole of the scientific image, what Sellers calls the scientific image, is the product of that wonderful effort by one species to overcome the species-specific limitations that evolution has granted it. We can measure to n decimal places how far off accurate somebody's vision is, how somebody's hearing. We can measure which part of the spectrum their vision is sensitive to and which it isn't. This creates our belief in the objective reality of the world as described in the scientific image. But you don't take that path, and I don't know why not.
Right. I don't take that path because I take space and time to be, and the predicates of space and time, to be a species-specific adaptation and not an insight. So in physics, of course, we will then take it to the next step. We'll use group theory, Euclidean group, Poincaré group, and other groups to extend the predicates of perception to the more general case, but there's still the predicates that we inherited. So I think the intellectual history of our species is slowly giving up the idea that the way we perceive the world is the way it is. So we thought about flat Earth. Why? Because that's the way it looks. We gave that up. It was hard, but we gave it up. Then we had to give up geocentric universe, and people died over that one. And again, why was it so hard to give up? It sure looked like the sun and the moon and the stars went around the Earth. It was hard for us to give that up. I'm saying the next step is space and time themselves. Flat Earth and geocentric universe were just warm-ups. Now as a species, we have to give up space and time and physical objects themselves because, okay. But I hasten to say, in a mathematically rigorous way, right? So what I want to do is to take my theory of conscious agents and get back, not less, but more than quantum field theory and eventually quantum gravity. So the burden on me is to get everything that current physics has gotten, but to understand that all the precision that you talked about is just the precision of a interface adapted for fitness, not truth.
Okay.
This is lots of people in from the audience, I think.
This is a question for Dennett. Can you venture a guess as to when you think people got that cognitive illusion, as you said, and who else may be prone to the same illusion?
Well, if you look at the history of thought and go back and look at the ancients, which is where David started, you see that they had some very naive views about how perception worked. They had a sort of projection theory. Of course, Hume famously said the mind spreads itself upon the world, but he meant that metaphorically. I do hope and I do believe. But earlier people had seen it the other way around, as something going out from the eyes rather than photons going in and being processed. They saw something marvelous and magical going out. So I think that there have been deep-seated illusions, cognitive illusions about the nature of experience for as long as we can recover in recorded history. I think that the more recent manifestations of this have been heightened and sort of crystallized by ideological warfare of a sort of propaganda campaigns, which have driven home to people these images of, for instance, the hard problem. It's very catchy, but I think that's all it is. It's like a jingle that you can't get out of your head. It's advertising toothpaste.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Kartik Subbarao. My question is for both Dave and for Dan. To the extent that you're self-aware, why do you study consciousness? Why is it personally important to you? Thank you.
Number one, I think it's the single most interesting problem in the universe. But number two, I think, okay, it's the central datum of our existence. And maybe this is the biggest difference between me and Dan, is that I take consciousness basically to be a datum, which is by its nature to be explained and not to be explained away. You know, there are all these facts about behavior and functioning, to be sure, which is great to have a theory of, but then there is subjective experience, datum, to be explained. So one, it's at the very center of our universe, and two, it is the single thing we do not understand. I actually started out in physics and mathematics and used to think, wouldn't it be great to be studying this stuff 300 or 400 years ago when we were just beginning to understand it? And there's a lot we don't understand now about in physics and mathematics, but it feels like in some sense, you know, we're filling in the picture. Consciousness is the phenomenon in the universe that we do not understand. Maybe in 200 years' time, we'll get lucky and say, yes, it was at that Tucson conference in 2014 when Don Hoffman finally solved it, or when Dennett cleaned it up for once and for all. Anyway, it seems to me that this is the subject right now for someone who's especially intellectually curious.
Well, I agree with David. It's the most interesting problem I know, and the most interesting unsolved set of problems that I know. And I think we now have the tools. And when I say now, I mean we have them today, and we didn't have them when I started 50 years ago on this. We're getting new tools for making progress on this every year, both mountains of data and new conceptual schemes, new ways of thinking about computation. We're getting away from simple-minded theories of computation and all the rest. So I think it's a golden age for solving the easy problems, which are the only problems that really exist. And they're none too easy. They're none too easy. Answering one example, if you read David Huron's book, Sweet Anticipation, it's about music in the brain, and there he will explain to you why do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, and ti, and do have the qualia that they have. He deconstructs the qualia of the scale tones. Now, a lot of philosophers say, that's impossible, it's inconceivable. No, that's a failure of imagination on their part to think so. But the other reason I think the problem of consciousness is so hard, I didn't get to this, it was one of my last slides, is that for many people, it's not a scientific issue. It's a sort of an aesthetic issue, or more particularly, it's a moral issue. A lot of people, and be honest with yourselves, they really don't want type A materialism to be true because they think the vision of us as, meat machines is demeaning and leads to nihilism, and that you can't have free will and love and meaning in that world. That, I think, is a big mistake. And of course, anybody who knows my work knows that I have tried all along to show, yes, this view is friendly to meaning, to free will, to morality, all of these good things. You don't have to have a mysterious mind pearl to make sense of those things. So I continue in my deliberately conservative way to try to be a type A materialist. I don't see any insuperable obstacles standing in the way, and I see a lot of progress. And I'm sure the rest of you are having fun with your theories, but I don't see that they're needed, and so that's good too, because I got to admit, it would be an awful lot of work for me to understand Donald's theory.
Burton Voorhees.
I guess I do agree that we're making more progress on the easy problems than on the hard problem. That's because they're easier. I mean, what do you what do you expect? But I do want to disagree on this one last point, the thought that it's somehow a moral or quasi-religious need for reductionism to be false. I think this is just brought out to be wrong sociologically. Look at all the people I mentioned, the Pinkers, the Kurzweils, the Cricks, the Kochs. These are people who really want some form of reductionism or materialism to be true. There's a deep-seated aching for all this stuff to be explained in terms of the brain or computation and so on. But even these people, at the end of the day, say, well, there is just scientifically, intellectually, philosophically, a residual issue here. And I don't think it's particularly plausible this is a little vestige of religion or moral fear in them. It's just paying attention to the data and saying, we've got to explain the data to be explained.
Well, no, I think in the case of your foursome there, nobody's perfect. They've all been taken in by you.
This even includes your fellow new atheists, right? Sam Harris, even Richard Dawkins. I've seen him softening up a bit on the hard problem. Anyway.
Okay, Burton.
Okay, this question is for Don, and I'd like to get a little bit more clarity on. You did mention that you believe there is a world out there. That it's not just the interface. And when you constructed your conscious agent, one aspect of that was the letter W for the world. And then you put another conscious agent in there and took off. But I'm wondering if that world also includes things that are not conscious agents, or if everything's a conscious agent.
Well, right now I'm trying to see how far I can go where I make the assumption that the world consists only of conscious agents. Now, maybe it's a precise claim, so we can now try to test that precise claim and see if it's precisely wrong. But so the idea is a monism, and to then test whether we can get all of current science from that. So that is the objective world. It's not a physical world, it's not space and time. It's a world of conscious agents that's not in space and time, and it's not physical.
We're going to have one more from the audience, but I want to ask Dan a question. In your image of mental time looping backwards, as I recall, was an effort to negate Libet's backward time referral. Wasn't
No,
that?
it wasn't. It was my explanation of the color 5 phenomenon. But what do you want to ask me about Libet? Because I've got strong views on that too.
Because I think the backward time referral was real. We now have evidence in quantum physics of backward time referral. We had Daryl Bem speaking last time about things from the future, and we have a talk. So you're ignoring facts. Those are facts. Those are evidence.
It's a fact, I gather, from what you say, that Daryl Bem gave a talk. I accept that.
You won't be here, but there's a talk Thursday morning about backward time effects. You should stay.
So my question is actually about the very interesting coleopterans from the outback who are making a very conscious decision to mate with the beer bottles rather than with the females. Still, we made a very conscious decision of interfering to save the species. So where is the evolutionary gain or loss from having consciousness?
Oh, where is the evolutionary gain or loss from having consciousness? Okay, so
if I may restate, if you can hear me, I was wondering about the conscious decision that the beetles made to mate with the bottles rather than with the females. I mean, they may be trying to save the world by not procreating, till we interfered with our consciousness. So where is sort of the evolutionary benefit of that? Is it more of a cost? Is it a benefit? This concept of consciousness.
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I can say that if conscious realism is correct, then the only thing that has evolved is consciousness. And the standard evolutionary theory will have to come out as a special case when we project an evolutionary of consciousness theory onto space and time. In terms of the beetle, I don't know about the moral aspects of our consciousness and what it did for the beetle. My only point there was simply to use the beetle as an example of the fact that our perceptions may sometimes appear to be clever and insightful when in fact they're just hacks. That was my only point with the beetle.
And with that, let's thank our all-star panel here for a great session.